Hello and welcome to Wild Vittles. I've got a really interesting episode for you today. It's not going to be cooking. It's going to be an interview. And I've got on Andrew Lukosevic from EndurHunt. He is a fellow podcaster, and I'll let him introduce himself. But just to kind of explain, Chris, why do you have Andrew on? He and I have a friend in common in the Carrie Beeson, and we've both been on the Salty Yak podcast. And that's really how I sought out Andrew and was really impressed with his story, his podcast, a lot of his why. We'll talk about that. And we'll delve into his journey as well on wild game cooking, processing. I find it to be really interesting, and I want to get the perspective of somebody who is, really taking this up for the first time as an adult and didn't really have the benefit of kind of growing up in that. So, Andrew, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Chris. It's fun to connect with people. Carrie's great at that. I feel like he and a few others that I've connected with on the podcasting space, once you meet some people, they're just like, oh, you should have this person on your show, or you should talk to this person. And I've never been steered wrong. So I'm happy to be here, happy to connect and talk about wild game, hunting, cooking, processing, all of it.
Like I said, I wanted to kind of introduce, my audience to you. If you could explain a little bit about your podcast, what it's about, why you started it, and you've been at it for just about a year now, I think.
Yeah. So I started the podcast, I want to say the end of March 2023. So not quite a year yet, but we're getting there. It's funny. I don't recommend people listen to my first 3 or 4 episodes because I had no equipment and the quality is awful. I actually kind of want to re-record some of those episodes because you can actually listen to them and appreciate them now. But I started the podcast because I struggled the entire way making my journey. So I grew up in a non-hunting, non-gun owning family. The first time I touched a firearm was when I was in basic training for the Marines, and I was 19 years old. Never touched anything before that. In high school, I was actually against hunting, not morally. I just didn't understand the point when you could go to the grocery store. I was just so naive and ignorant. It was just beyond me that someone would want to work harder than necessary to get food. That's changed significantly. But I got out of the Marines, and a buddy of mine took me on he asked me while I was deployed, actually, I was in the Middle East. He reached out and said, hey, my wife got me this elk mule deer combination hunt in Montana on public land. I don't trust anyone else that would go. And I know you don't hunt, but do you have any interest in it? And I was like, I'd actually been thinking about it. One of the things that I know this is one of the things that we're probably going to talk about, but in the Marines, I learned a lot more about being self-sufficient and understanding where your food comes from and all of that kind of stuff. So it was really interesting to me. Well, I went out to that Montana hunt. We didn't get anything, but I was pretty much hooked after that. The problem was I was solo. I had no one that lived near me. We lived in 2 different states. We were over 2 hours away. And I read everything I could, watched YouTube videos, everything I could to learn. But it was really hard for me to get started. And I was successful in hunting because I'm stubborn, honestly. And I refused to give up. And I've been doing it for a few years now. That first hunt was 2018. And this is going to be my 7th year hunting, I think. I can't really math that well, apparently. But, I've gotten 6 different states. I've hunted quite a few different species. And I feel like, I have so much to learn. But I think I can put information out there for the person that's just getting started, that's a few years behind me. I'm no expert. But I created EndurHunt as a resource for other first-generation emergent hunters that are interested, think it's daunting, and don't really know where to start. That's kind of my whole goal with it.
Yeah, that really speaks to me because although I wouldn't define myself as like a first-generation hunter, I grew up whitetail hunting and upland hunting, really. The whole hunting out west, though, we have a parallel kind of experience. I started in 2018. That was my first ever out west hunt. And it's a real interesting journey. It's very different than I'm from Oklahoma originally, and that's where I do a lot of my whitetail hunting. But I would say, going out west, I think I've hunted 5 or 6 states now. I apply for nearly everything.
Same.
It took and I'm so impressed with your elk success so quickly. It took me 5 years to get a bull with a bow, and oh my God, I was so excited about that. But it's similar in that I didn't understand at all kind of the how around the big game hunting in the West, and really had to learn primarily through the internet, books, listening to podcasts. I did have a few people that I talked to, but I think I've tended to hunt more than others because I'm an empty nester now, so I have a little bit more time. So I'm kind of closer to Carrie's age than your age in my journey here. So that kind of spoke to me, and I really respected what I heard in your approach as well. So like when you were talking about your bull that you got in Arizona, that you told the guide, no, I want to do the skinning and the quartering and all that. I had the same experience, because he was like, well, we'll gut it and we'll come back in the morning. I was like, no way in hell. We're going to get out the game bags and we're going to quarter it right now. And by the way, I'm doing it. I just need you to hold a leg.
Mm-hmm.
So, very different experience. I think both of us kind of approach things in a very similar manner from that perspective.
Yeah, I think so. I wanted the full experience,
Yeah.
and it's something that I wouldn't trade. I mean, I have that bull hanging up as soon as you walk in my house, the first thing you see is that elk head. You can't miss it. It's a Euro. But every time I go up to my office or I walk in the house, I see it and I think the memories come flooding back. That experience is one I will never forget. That's for sure.
So kind of transitioning from the hunting piece and kind of getting to what we'll be talking about this evening is a lot about the cooking. So, okay, let's just take the elk, for example. Was that your first, I guess, big game animal that you took was the elk?
No, my first one was a whitetail.
Okay.
To date, I've taken, I think, well, let's see, I got the whitetail that I got with Carrie this year. I think I've taken 3 whitetail bucks in my 6 years.
Okay.
I've got the elk bull, the pronghorn. That is, for those who are watching video, there's a pronghorn above my head. I got the pronghorn from Wyoming, axis deer that I got in Texas.
Yep.
And then the elk.
So all of those, especially the elk, are extremely large animals. I mean, like when I got my bull and I do my own processing, I actually kind of weighed out what I got, and I had over 200 pounds of meat. And for a whitetail, are not quite as big as an elk. So maybe you get 50, 65 pounds of meat, depending upon what kind of cuts you do and things like that, or if maybe you have some sausage made because you're adding in some fat or support. But that's a considerable amount of meat. How did you approach it from a perspective of now you're a new hunter and now you've got this wild game? What was your approach on, like utilizing that meat and just kind of standing back? Did you have to be kind of like, was that all came along with your process of getting ready and you were already thinking about it afterwards, or was it kind of an afterthought after you got it home? You're like, what do I do with all this?
I think my process has sort of developed over my years. When I first started hunting, when I got that first whitetail, I did all of the processing myself. I bought used equipment off Facebook Marketplace. I bought a used grinder with like the sausage stuffing attachments and all that. I tried making sausage myself. I did the whole thing. And I had this very meticulous process. At this point, I've kind of evolved to sort of flexibility. I like to decide how I want to use things. And I generally understand the different cuts at this point and what they're good for. The thing that was really hard for me, you just, like you said, a whitetail, is nothing compared to an elk. So I had an idea about what I was going to do. Generally, my process is break down the major muscle groups and I leave them whole until I'm going to figure out how I want to actually use it. Now, I do set some stuff aside for ground and sausage and all of that. But for example, I can't remember if it's the top round or the bottom round, but one of those is my jerky cut. I have a jerky recipe that is, every time my family sees that I have success, the first thing is not congratulations, it's when are we getting jerky? And I know exactly the cut I use. Well, it is, I love it. It's the one thing that I make sure I do every time. And the scarcity of hunting actually makes me appreciate it more because I don't always have it available to me. But
Yeah. No, I
Um,
agree.
that cut, I have a new vacuum sealer now. I vacuum seal most of my stuff. Uh,
Hmm.
I have, I want to say it's a 12-inch by meat. I think that's the one I
Yep.
have.
Yep.
I can't believe how big that cut is on elk. It would not fit whole in one of those
Yeah.
bags. I had to cut it
Yeah.
into pieces.
Yep.
So generally, my process was the same, but I definitely had to adapt because the sirloin tip, all of those different pieces of the hams, the back straps, they're huge.
Yep.
I basically followed my process, but had to break it into smaller chunks to make it more manageable to fit in the freezer.
I wasn't sure, and I'm all when I ask about processing, I want to make sure people know I'm not. I don't think less of people that don't process themselves. I didn't process in the beginning because I really didn't. I didn't have the equipment. I didn't have the knowledge. And I was and when you hunt archery season, especially, it can be quite warm and flies and everything else, and it's a little more convenient. Or you could be traveling. But I like now at this point in my life, I really enjoy the processing myself. I tell the story. The pivotal moment of when I switched was when I found a bullet in my ground meat. It was in my chili.
Wow. That's, yeah, you don't want that to happen.
No, and I understand there. That outfit was doing a lot of deer, and they were busy, right? But it's that kind of care that I want to bring to the process. Plus I enjoy the doing. I enjoy all the processes. Let me back up a little bit before I get too much into processing cooking. When when you got your elk or when you get your deer, probably the elk is more applicable. Do you generally do like a gutless approach and skin it and all that? And how did you approach it the first time that you did it as a new hunter? Was that pretty daunting, or were you confident based on just what you'd seen? Because YouTube makes everything so accessible these days.
More often than not, I gut animals.
Hmm.
And with the elk, the way it laid on the ground, there was
Hmm.
no way to do the gutless method. I mean, maybe
Yep.
you could have, but the way everything was laid out, like we tried to reposition it and we couldn't get it to move.
Yeah.
So we ended up gutting it. Generally, I probably gut most of the animals. Gutting and then quartering is kind of the way I like to do it.
Yep.
I religiously use game bags. I like
Yeah. Me
to
too.
immediately get things into game bags, hang it up if I can, and then depending on the animal, like with some, it's easy. When I got my pronghorn, for example, that could fit in a backpack by itself. They're not very
Yep.
large, but the elk was 2 trips.
Yep.
So we broke everything down, laid it all out so it could cool. It was Arizona. Uh, it was in like mountains. It was a national forest. I can't remember exactly which national forest it was, but it wasn't like East Texas where there's tall pines. It's
Right.
shrub oaks and like smaller things. So we actually we weren't able to hang anything up, but there was a fallen tree that was bare. Like something had walked over it and rubbed all the limbs off. So we put everything in game bags and laid it all out so that there could at least be some wind to cool it down, and then
Yeah.
trips back and forth so that we could transport it.
Yeah. No, I think, taking care of the meat from the get go is so important. And especially, I think pronghorn, they've got kind of an oil on their skin. I don't know if you noticed when you have one, they have this smell
Hmm.
about them that's very distinctive. And I'm always trying to keep that hair off, which is very difficult because our hair is very brittle. But all that you can do to try to keep, that meat clean is so important. And if you can keep it dry as well is important. What's your approach? And I'm just comparing notes here. You got a long out of state hunt. What do you do in your way of your transportation strategy? Do you throw it in like wet ice where it's got contact? Do you keep it separate?
No, that also has evolved over the years. The very
Yeah,
first one I did, I got some bad advice off of a Facebook, and it was all right. I got bad advice off of a Facebook group where someone was like, "Oh, you should rinse the meat with water and stuff once you get it back," which I realize
that
is
makes me
stupid because,
crazy. It makes me
well,
crazy when
oh
people
yeah,
do
I
that.
don't do it anymore. It drives me nuts because
Yeah,
what ends up happening is you just put that plain, boring water in the meat and you lose the flavor.
all of it.
Um,
Yeah.
but anyway, now I go back and forth. So I've done
Yep.
the filling up gallon water jugs, freezing
Yep.
them, and putting those in my coolers. And what I usually do is I have a nice Arctic cooler
Hmm.
and I will stuff that to the brim with the frozen jugs. This way they stay cold and I have a backup cooler depending on what I'm doing.
Hmm.
Like with the elk, for example, it took me 3 coolers to get that thing because I left it bone in because I do like
Yeah.
to keep the bones. Um,
Yep.
so my options are either I'll do that with the jugs, or my mother-in-law uses like HelloFresh or one of those food services, and they bring these gel packs, and those gel packs freeze really solid and they stay
Hmm.
frozen longer than water.
Yeah.
So when I went out to Montana for my hunt in 2023, I used gel packs instead because I knew I was going to be gone for 10 days and the
Hmm.
jugs wouldn't last that long.
Yeah.
And the gel packs did last. So it kind of depends on where I'm going and how long I'm going to be there. I prefer the jugs because those gel packs tend to leak, and I do
Yeah.
not want that getting in touch with the meat. If I
No.
ever have concerns, I bring those like Home Depot contractor bags. So
Hmm.
what I'll do is I'll let the meat air out in the game bags. It's weather depending, right? If it's not cool out, if it's
Sure.
early season hunt, I won't do that as much. But I will let it air out and then I will put it in garbage bags and lay that on top of the ice or the gel packs. This way, if there's leakage or anything, the meat has another layer of protection.
It's too funny. We do the same thing. I do the frozen gallon jugs, but in the beginning, I would just do bags of ice, and I would lay, the quarters in the bags on top of the ice, trying to ensure it didn't get wet. But the game bags soak up the water, and then when I'd go to process it, all of it would be kind of gray, and I'd have to trim so much off. But if I was able to keep it, in those jugs, and the jugs have a little condensation, so it still gets a little wet, it made such a difference. And one pro tip that I've picked up, I think it helps. I haven't really measured this scientifically, but when I leave for a trip, I will buy some dry ice on the way out to put in the cooler with the jugs to kind of like super freeze it for a few days. I think it gives me a couple days extra at the back end. So a possibility.
I have read so much about dry ice, and to
Yeah.
be completely transparent, I'm just too scared to
Yep.
try it. I'm worried. I hear all the
It
horror stories about not
it blow
ventilating
up.
things right and it'll explode, and I'm like,
Yeah.
do I really want to try it? But
Yeah.
for those long hunts, like I want to go on an Idaho hunt eventually,
Yep.
and uh, the idea of flying with everything is just a lot for me. I'd rather just drive
It's
it and
not for
break it
me.
up. So I feel
Yeah.
like I need to learn how to do dry ice. So when that happens, I
Yep.
might ask for your. I'll message you or something. We could talk about
Yeah.
that outside of the podcast.
Sure thing. Sure thing. But I haven't done it every time, and it kind of depends the weather I'm going in. But generally speaking, if it's warm like an elk hunt, like in September, after even 5 or 6 days, I've still got, it'll be a little water around the ice, but it's a chunk of ice. I'll pour that water out, or maybe I'll leave it in and put those quarters in there. The last piece that really has made a difference too is, thank God I have a wife that is understanding. And so I think most people in America have a drink fridge, kind of an extra fridge, either in your refrigerator or in your garage or your house. I take everything out of it and I put those quarters in there for a few days, and that kind of dries out any moisture that was on the skin. And I've had some quarters come out look like they were just like off of a showroom floor. They're so beautiful because they get that nice kind of hard cast on the outside. So really helpful, but it depends on the environment whether or not you can do that.
Have you ever tried wet aging?
I have not.
That's kind
I'm
of
a little
my go-to
skittish of
method
it.
now.
Is it?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Hmm.
Okay.
I don't have. So I have one fridge and a
Yep.
standalone freezer. I don't
Okay.
have the backup freezer.
Yep.
So normally I do all of my basic processing. I don't process everything. I think we'll talk probably sausage and stuff like that. I have learned
Yep.
that I'm not
Yep.
very good at making sausage, and
You're
I
probably better
prefer.
than me.
Well, I have a processor do it now because
Yep.
it's just so perfect. I want to try again this year. I don't think I'm going to try and do my own sausage, but because I only have the one fridge, and it's always got some form of food in it.
Yep.
I started doing the wet aging. The downside of the wet aging, in my opinion, is I go through more vacuum seal bags because
Yeah.
you have to clean them out. You don't want it to
Yeah.
sit. But I'll wet age for 2 or 3 weeks if I have a particular cut that I know I want to use.
Really? Wow.
And it makes a difference. It really does.
No, I agree. Yeah. I've seen some guys do dry aging about that long, and you really have to kind of clean that rind off the outside. So I think a lot of mine is, kind of time. I know you've spoken before that you have limited time for all that you're doing. And so I have to address it when I can. And I've not been able to do more than like 4 to 5 days probably
Yeah.
before I get it put up. So when you go, when you do the processing, and hats off to you for jumping right in and processing immediately. How did you go about learning to do that? Was that kind of a how-to, or did you have somebody that could help you with that?
No, it was definitely a how-to. I
Yeah.
watched. So the two Steve Rinella is
Yep.
one. I don't remember which episode or season, but there's one season that he
He's got
has
one where he does an
where
entire deer. Yeah.
yes, I watched that my first year. I think I watched that episode 3 times while I was doing the processing. I've also watched the Bearded Butchers. I don't know if you've seen them.
Yep.
They're on YouTube. They've made better
I have.
versions now.
Yeah.
But I watched their original
Yeah.
breaking down a deer, but they have much better versions now for people who are out there that want to figure it out. That's probably one of the best breakdowns that I've seen is what they have.
Okay. So this will speak to my age. I learned off of a VHS tape. So
I had a VHS.
it was actually I think the founder or owner of LEM. I don't know if we call it LEM or LEM, one of the two, but they're a food processing company, and they have a lot of great products for the stuff that we're talking about. And one of the things too that I've learned over the years, because I started by going to a processor and then do it myself. It would be like I'd do burger, steaks, and roasts, and you just kind of whatever they suggested. Or at the time that I'm doing it myself, I've got these grand dreams that I'm going to do, like certain cuts, certain ways. Have you learned over the years kind of what works for you and your household? Have you kind of tailored those things, and what's your suggestion for folks?
Well, here's my first thing. Do not throw away the neck meat.
I agree.
The people, it should be a sin.
You mean like leaving it in the field, you mean?
Yes. Yeah. Do not leave that in the field. It is
That's crazy.
My favorite is using the neck meat, the neck roast. Yep. I love it. The ribs are also good to keep too.
Yeah.
Over the year, I feel like every year I change a little bit of what I do in terms of what I keep. My favorite things are probably a pan sausage and ground. I use that so much. I like a breakfast sausage. Mm-hmm. It's one of my favorite things. Those two are probably by a volume standpoint, we use that more than anything, because I'll use the ground in tacos and chili, and it's useful for anything. I'll make burgers, pastas, whatever. Yeah. And then I do keep the roasts. Jerky is the other big one. The 3 guarantees are I will do, I guess 4 guarantees. I'm going to do a slow cooked meal, braised meal with the neck roast. It is going to happen. Probably multiple meals depending on the animal. I am going to make jerky out of the hindquarters, those 2 top or bottom roast rounds. I can't remember which one it is. I think it's the bottom round. I'm going to make a breakfast pan sausage, and I'm going to have ground. Those are the 4 guarantees. Everything else I kind of change. I generally keep the whole muscles, and then I figure it out. I like to do the sirloins whole. The back straps, I have a particular way I like to do them. So like I do the standard salts, pepper, garlic, but I have this, I can't remember the name of it. There's a type of mushroom that you can buy at HEB or pretty much every, you can buy them dried, and I have a grinder, and I turn them into powder.
Porcini.
Yeah, that's it. Porcini mushrooms. That's exactly the one.
Yep.
And I did that once, and my wife was like, "This is the best backstrap you've ever made. What did you do different?" And I made a salt, pepper, garlic, and porcini mushroom rub, and that's kind of the go-to. And I'll baste it with butter in the pan after I do a reverse sear. I started messing with the sous vide, and I haven't done too much with that yet, but that's kind of generally what I do. Sorry, I went on a couple tangents there.
No, that's great. That's great. I mean, the reverse sear is very similar to the sous vide, really. I mean, you're kind of doing a controlled cook and then just kind of browning it on the inside, which I think in the right circumstances is almost a superior product to do in the grilling. But I love being out on the grill, but it kind of depends on your circumstances. But I'm really intrigued by the jerky, because I've been a little, I don't know, kind of hesitant to try it. A little explanation is I'm a bit of a germphobe, so I feel like I've got to get that meat like to at least 160, which I've been educated now, like for some of these pathogens, it's more about its time and temperature, not just temperature, right? They've even lowered, I think, the Trichinella temperature guidelines to
I think
much
it's
lower than it used to
140,
be.
but it has to be
Something
at
like that.
140 for like 30 minutes or something. And
Yeah.
it might not be that long, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is now.
Yeah. So it all depends, but I guess I've been hesitant to try the jerky, even though I mean, some people would say, well, it's so simple. It's also, I know, a lot of work because it's a lot of volume of starting product to come to not much finished product, right? How have you done it? Has it been in a dehydrator? Are you doing that in the oven or the grill, or what are you doing?
Version 1 was with the
Yeah.
oven.
Yeah.
Version 2, I used a smoker and I propped it open.
Yeah.
I have a dehydrator now, a Cabela's like 5-tray dehydrator, nothing
I've
super
been looking at
special,
those.
but I've been using that one for the last 2 seasons, maybe 3 seasons
Yeah.
now, and love it. It does require batch work. It's kind of a pain in the butt to clean, but you get the
Yeah.
best product using a dehydrator than I have. I mean, and don't get me wrong, it was still good when I did it with the oven and the smoker, but it's much better with the dehydrator, in my opinion.
Yeah. That's you've got me having the itch to do some jerky now, because I know exactly what cut you're talking about. It's really long grain and be good thin sliced. Um, yeah, that's really got me interested.
You
I'm
gotta
gonna have
try
to.
it.
I've been really thinking about doing it, but I've got too many projects is my problem. I got a lot of things I want to get done.
Same. I understand that
Yeah,
problem very
yeah,
much.
yeah. Well, it sounds like you started out with a lot of success right out the bat, and I think that's probably a testament to the availability of information out there. Because I don't know, we're kind of in a renaissance of people getting into hunting, and also the cooking is become so important. And part of the reason that I've started this podcast, I vividly remember hunting with my dad's friends, and they would come to deer camp. We had a deer camp in Oklahoma. And they were almost disappointed when they got one. They're like, "Oh, I'm having so much fun, and now I got to deal with this." Have you come across that in some of the folks that you're around, or maybe this is a thing of the past? Because I think there is a different approach to hunting than there used to be.
I haven't. I think I have the opposite. When I remember vividly, so 2022, I went out on 2 Western hunts. We've
Mm-hmm.
talked at time is a limited resource,
Yeah.
and I was planning on doing an over-the-counter Utah archery elk hunt. That was the plan, but I apply for everything, kind of like you said, and I
Mm-hmm.
got lucky and drew that Arizona elk tag. I was not planning on it.
That is so lucky, dude.
No, really. I had 1 point. I had 7% draw odds. I mean,
That is crazy.
it's going to take me 9 years to draw that tag again, I'm sure. But so I'm out there with 2 of my best friends, and we're 5 days into this hunt, and all 3 of us are talking about. Well, we didn't get anything, but I think this is related, so I'm going to connect the 2. We're talking about how much we miss our wives, and I
Mm-hmm.
feel like the sentiment, generally speaking, is guys go on these hunts because they want to get away from the wives and the kids and everything like that. And all of us are like, no, we have really good partners. We have good families. It actually hurts us to be away, but this is important for
Right.
us. We want to be able to have this experience, bring the meat back, have the stories, and live life. And I think for people like me that are starting later, or maybe it's just
Mm-hmm.
this generation, that the whole experience and the meaning behind it is very important. Where I think
Mm-hmm.
maybe back in the day, it used to be just about camaraderie and getting away from,
Yeah, I think you're right.
everything.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I have the same feeling. And sometimes I feel a little selfish, right? You're going on this trip and your family's, back home. And I've heard other guys, I've heard Trail Kreitzer from Go Hunt, he's got his own podcast and he's made that comment as well. But I would tell you, my wife encourages me to go, and I'm sure your spouse would probably do the same, although I know she likes to come with you, because she knows it's important to me. And I hear other people say this, that they have the same interaction with their spouse. They're like, you come back a better person, and I can tell that it really means a lot to you. I'm sure you guys have had a similar discussion probably.
Oh yeah, we have. If it wasn't for my wife, I would not have had that elk. I didn't get the elk until I think the 6th day of the hunt. We hadn't seen a single elk
Yeah.
until then. And after 4 days of struggling,
Yeah.
and I knew she was missing, like she wanted me to come back home and she was like, no, you should stay
Yep.
out there. It's only a 7-day season. Keep at it. And if it wasn't for her support,
Yep.
I never would have gotten that elk.
That is a key to success. I think a lot of us, myself included, when I first started Western hunting, you expect it to be like a whitetail hunt. And if you hunt hard enough, long enough, you'll come across whitetail and you'll probably get something. But, the Western hunts and your Arizona hunt, I listened to your podcast, and it was late in the hunt before you even saw a bull. It's very common. It's big country. They're not, like coming to the same place every day. And elk, they can be in one basin one day and be 20 miles away the next day. So it's just very difficult. And people just I think you really have to adjust your expectations around this, or you're going to be very unhappy, I'm afraid.
Agreed. Completely agree with that.
I'm really interested. I'm impressed that you're already doing sausage. It took me years to kind of get up the gumption to do sausage. Are you doing like encasing? Are you doing, spices, or how do you approach that?
I've tried a few different. So the reason I still do it, but I haven't quite gotten it figured out. The grind is what gets me. I always end up either making it too thin and it doesn't have that bite. I use natural casings, pig intestine casings.
Me too.
And I've tried doing like sweet Italian style. Mm-hmm. I've tried doing like an andouille style sausage. I mean, I don't have good advice for it because every time I make it, I'm always like, I just need to pay someone to do this because I don't do a good job. But I'm too stubborn to. And this is the thing. I always bring some of that to a processor because I love sharing food with family and friends. That's one of my favorite things to do. And I feel bad when I make the sausage. I'm like, nope, I'm just going to eat this by myself because I don't want anyone else to have to suffer and eat it.
Right. No, I understand completely. And yeah, my first batches were edible, but they weren't as good as it should be, and I feel a little guilty about that because you're like, look, this meat is very scarce, right? And you want to make the most of it. But it is a journey, and I thoroughly believe that you have to kind of risk that to kind of figure it out. Now, maybe you don't do 50 pounds, but you've got to be willing to fail to learn, I think, sometimes. And I've had some failures, unfortunately, but generally you can salvage those.
Yeah, I think we've all had failures. It's just part of the process, but that's kind of where I'm at. I save a very small portion of it to do for testing purposes. And I acknowledge that if it doesn't go right, I'll end up chopping it up and throwing it in some eggs or something.
Yeah. And I forgot to mention too, you were talking about burger, and I'm right there with you. In fact, I think it's funny. I had a debate with this guy named Judson, who's a good friend. And he's kind of in a similar journey because he's getting into big game Western hunting, but he's been a whitetail hunter for a long time. And he's a foodie too. He's really good at cooking. In fact, I'm going to have him on the podcast at some point. And we were going back and forth on texting because we're always talking to each other about different approaches of what we're doing or processing. And I was telling him I'm grinding. He's like, why are you grinding those fantastic roasts? I'm like, because this is the way that I'll eat it. It's like, I know that I'll run out of ground meat if I keep all the roast. Now, what I do generally is I'll grind one hind quarter and I'll keep one hind quarter in its parts, right? But I have a higher demand for that grind meat. And I heard a funny term on the Meat Eater. They were talking about, what's his name from Arkansas? Clay Newcomb, that he gets ground shamed because I think he does 100% of his deer into ground meat, but it's probably because his family, they really look forward to the meals that they prepare with ground meat. Now, it would be hard to ground up a tenderloin, but still, if that's the way you utilize it for you, that's what you ought to do, and I find like defrosting a roast it takes so long. It's such a commitment. You have to plan ahead so far, right?
Yeah, this is part of that growth. I feel like each year I get better at predicting how we use the meat. Yeah. And those first couple deer that I had, there were some roasts that sat in the freezer for a long time. And I've learned we eat a lot of ground meat. We eat a lot of ground like pan sausage. And so we dedicate a lot more of the animal to that. And every once in a while I like doing the shoulder blade roast. I think you actually did a barbacoa video with it, but I'll do a slow cook or a braise with that whole bone-in roast. If I know I want
Yep.
to do that, I'll save it. But there are times where I'm like, no, we're low on ground. This is going to go to ground meat. And it's just, I want to use it. So you have to adjust and be realistic with what's actually going to allow you to eat the food and utilize the resource.
Yep. No, I'm in complete agreement. I mean, you got to kind of look at your inventory, right? And that's kind of what I'll try to impress upon folks is you need to know what you've got. You need to learn year to year about your utilization, make some course corrections, right? And I think most people do, but very impressed that you're taking on some advanced topics I will say as a hunter that's come to it as an adult. You're already at a pretty high level of some of the complexity of things that you're taking on.
Oh, I appreciate that.
I geek out on these things. And like try to plan out a menu for the week and things like that. How do you guys approach your wild game cooking? Do you plan over the weekend ahead, or is it a day at a time? Or because we're dealing with meat that's in the freezer, right? So you always have to at least have a day like lead time.
Yeah. So I'm the cook in the household. My wife does not care for cooking that much. She does cook sometimes.
Absolute same.
But so my background is engineering. When in the military, I was an analyst. So everything I do is like critical thinking. I'm also a tech nerd. I very much like to understand how things work and the complexities of things and understand it. And then I go down rabbit holes. And that's kind of the problem is once I start going down a path, I want to dissect every portion of it, understand why it works, what difference the individual pieces make. And that's how I ended up getting down to this point, because I obsess about stupid details with things that I probably shouldn't. And that's kind of what got me to this point. And that's partly why I love cooking, is because you can follow the recipe and it'll be good. And I'm mostly a recipe person. I think Carrie mentioned that when you were on his show, that he's very much a recipe person. I'm kind of that way too. But I grew up really poor and I learned that you've got to use what you got in the pantry. Whatever you've got is what you've got. Right. And I like to see how I can take certain recipes and adapt them to what I already have on hand. There are some things that you have to buy from a store, but I try to adapt things. And one of the most common things that I do is I look at the standard recipes that I like eating every day. Like, what would I go out and get at a restaurant? Now, how can I use this with wild game? And one of the goals that I set when I started hunting was I do not want to buy beef from the supermarket. I want to, I'm not good enough. I have never successfully taken a turkey. I have not started waterfowl hunting. That's something I really want to do. But I've found a decent amount of success with big game hunting. And I set the goal several years ago to not have to buy any beef. I've made one exception in 3 years. I had friends visiting. They wanted to have some brisket. I bought a brisket and we did it the right way. That's the one exception I made in 3 years. Other than that, I have not bought any beef. So when it comes to approaching the meals, I'm very boring for breakfast and lunch. I basically eat the same thing for breakfast every day, which is why I go through so much breakfast sausage, because I eat it basically every day. When it comes to dinners, I tend to I have two methods. I try to do some ground meal a week. Usually it's tacos or I'll do pastas. And I try to look at the inventory of roasts that I have. And I will I might do some backstrap. I might do sirloin, whatever I have. I'll take it out a couple of weeks ahead of time to let it age. And I'll usually do this with a few roasts. So I'll take out a sirloin and a piece of backstrap or a different ham roast. And I will take that vacuum seal bag, I'll write the date on it, and then I let it sit for a week, and then I change the bags out. And I usually do this on the weekends. So I kind of roughly have an idea about which roasts I want to use or which cuts I want to use. But because I end up waiting so long, honestly, the Sunday comes and I'll look at what's in the fridge and I'll be like, all right, well, this one is going to be ready for me to use this week. What do I feel like making? And that's kind of generally how my approach is.
That's a real long lead time on that. I'm impressed to the planning. It makes me feel bad. Some of it that we'll do is like, what are we going to do tomorrow? And what do I have to hurry up and get up?
Oh, I do plenty of that too. Don't get me wrong. I do plenty of that too. But It's generally the roasts. You mentioned
Yep.
looking at your inventory, and I
Yep.
constantly am going in the freezer. I'll open the door and just be like, all right, what do I got? And I have
Yep.
because I'm fortunate right now, I've got a variety of species to pick from. I have them
Yeah.
all on their own separate shelves in my standing freezer. So I'll look and be
Yep.
like, all right, how much elk do I have left? I'm a very first in, first out person. So I'm basically only eating elk right now. I still have elk from 2022. And I'll look at it and like, oh, I've
Yep.
got a lot of this type of cut. I'm going to pull this out and I'll figure out what I'm going to do with it. I wouldn't say so much it's a pre-planning. It's you're going to use this because it's in the fridge and you're going to figure it out when the time comes.
It's true. I mean, it does force the situation, right? You're gonna find a way.
Mm-hmm.
For my red meat, like elk and deer, I'll do like butcher paper, and it's probably not as good a seal as a vacuum seal, but I'll take that off, and then it'll have like a deli paper or plastic underneath that. This is kind of a barrier for, I guess, freezer burn. Put that in a Ziploc, put that in some water, and you'd be amazed the difference it'll make. And I as an engineer, you probably understand this better than me, that the convection of, heat, really, because you're kind of, I guess, putting heat into that frozen piece of meat is much higher, a higher rate than it would be for air. I'll put it that way. So seems to be pretty effective.
Yeah, I'm going to have to try that next time because there are plenty of moments where I thought I pulled something out of the freezer
Yeah.
and then either that day or the night before I'll look and I'm like, oh man, I didn't do that. And then I'll throw it on the countertop, but that's not always effective, especially on short notice.
Yeah.
And depending on how big the
Yeah.
cut is, it just doesn't work.
Yeah. Those big chunks are tough, man. So what's your, this is Carrie hit me with this one too. So I'll share the same question. What's your favorite wild game recipe and why?
My personal favorite is I mentioned it earlier. So I used to do this. I don't do it bone in anymore. I used to take the venison neck, and what I would do is I would actually put it in the freezer for a bit, and then I would use a sawzall and I would cut it into
Yeah.
discs the way that Steve Ranella does the shanks for
Yep.
ossobuco. And I would
Yep.
use
Yep.
butcher twine to keep it nice and tight to have it hold its shape. And I would make a sort of ossobuco
Mm-hmm.
with the neck. I've got one of those enameled cast iron Dutch ovens. My wife got that for me a couple of years
Yep.
ago. That's
Yep.
probably my favorite is doing that. So I'll
Yep.
sear it on all sides. I do it boneless now, but it's pretty much the same. I still use the butcher
Yep.
twine and help that to
Yep.
get a nice even sear all the way around. And then your root vegetables, some form of stock, water, and then I'll braise it for hours. You could almost do all day, and then I'll make a
Yeah.
polenta on the side, and then serve it that way. Reduce the sauce down. It's
Yeah.
my favorite preparation. I love it.
Oh, that's next level. That sounds great. Yeah, I heard you say you did boneless. I'm a little spooked about, it's like CWD leaving the spine in there. It is not easy to debone a neck. That is a booger.
It
I don't know
is.
if
You
you've got
never
any
get it
tips or
perfect.
tricks
You are
for doing
losing
that.
something on there. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's just like the neck, those vertebrae, they've got, I think they're called processes. So you've got, the one off the top and there's off the sides. And, it takes like a skilled person. There's somebody I follow on Instagram that's over in Austin. Her name's Chris Abigail. And I was just like commenting on one of her posts because she's actually in a wild game butcher outfit. I'm sure they do domestic too, but they do, there's a lot of hunting ranches around. A lot of people bring their game to them. So I think they specialize in some of these things. And she had a picture of a nilgai neck that she had essentially just kind of went in and, filleted it out of that bone just beautifully. So it's one of those things like one of these days I'm going to get good enough, but often I'm in, it's dark, it's windy or something, like you're doing it with a headlamp. It's always a difficult situation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I try to save as much as I can, but I'm definitely not that skilled.
Yeah.
But it's still my favorite cut.
Well, you've done elk and whitetail and pronghorn. Is there, something else coming up on your bucket list from a hunt and a food, kind of like bucket list or goals that you're looking forward to?
I really want to do a black bear hunt. That
Yeah.
is kind of the next one for me. I've never had
Yeah.
black bear, and I want to do. No, I think fall. I can't remember if it's spring or fall. The one where they have the more fat. I think it's fall because they're building up the fat. because they
Probably
use
in the
it all in
fall.
the spring.
Yeah.
You get the good coat in the spring, but you get good fat in the fall. I think that's how it is. It's hard for me to justify going on a fall bear hunt, but that's the next one that I want to do because I've
Yeah.
heard such great things about bear meat and how good it tastes. I
Yep.
really want to try bear.
I'm right there with you. And I have a similar kind of dilemma in that in the fall, I've only got so many days and I don't want it to take away from, elk or mule deer or antelope, something like that. I do want to do a spring trip. But my dilemma there is, and we can get into this if we have time, is, that all the tag applications are about the same time. So if the tag applications, all the states would just listen to me and they do all of them like in February, and then we figure out all our results in March, then I could figure out and do a April, May, June timeframe spring bear hunt. But, the dang hunts or the dang applications go all the way into June. And so I don't always know kind of what my calendar is going to be. So one of these days, my long-term plan is I'm going to retire one of these days. And at least for a year or two, I'm going to have just like a year-round hunting schedule. But we'll see. That's on the dream list for me as well.
I'm a long way away from being able to do that. I got a lot of working years left ahead of me. The way I want to do the bear, I was actually hoping to do it in 2025, but I don't know that that's going to happen. I went to Dallas Safari Club last year, 2023, and I met an outfitter and was talking to them. They're in British Columbia. Very reasonably priced, much cheaper than my guided elk hunt in Arizona. You get two spring black bears. Now it's spring. But you get two of them. And they claim that they are good enough at the butcher. Now it's boneless. They bone everything out. But they claim that they can manage to get all of both capes and the meat, if you want all of the meat, because I don't think you're required to keep the meat, into coolers that you could pack on a plane. And
nice.
That is kind of the goal, I think, what I'd want to do for a spring bear hunt, because the idea of going into Canada and doing it just seems really cool.
That is. I mean, it would be quite an experience, I'm sure. I mean, just that country is just so rugged, and I just find bears really interesting as well. I desperately want, a bear rug. I think the meat would be fantastic from everything that I've heard and read. I was a little bit put off by the fact that you got to worry about trichinosis, but I've since also started shooting like feral hogs, and I've gotten comfortable with you just have to make sure you're going to cook it. You're not going to eat 130 degree rare steak. It needs to be either the time or the level of temperature is going to meet that criteria. But I also run around with a probe thermometer, making sure that they're done to the appropriate level.
Yeah, we just had our first hog. My wife shot a hog on Carrie's place actually a couple of weeks ago.
I saw that.
And everyone I know in Texas is like, can't eat hogs. They taste awful. I bought, why am I blanking on his name? Jesse Griffiths. I bought Jesse Griffiths' hog book. I pre-ordered it. I had never taken a hog before. I pre-ordered it because it was like
such a good book.
I've been to his restaurant at least 3 times here in Austin. Oh, it's so good. And
it's fantastic.
We got that hog, and I was so scared the first time I cooked it. It was literally like a week and a half ago. And I used the temperature probe, and I poked every part of that meat, and I was like, everything's going to be 160 degrees, every tiny thing. My one regret, we did the backstrap. My regret with it, because I wanted to just see how palatable it was by itself. First off, it tastes like pork. It tastes like pork. It doesn't taste any different. It is so dry. I mean, not dry. Lacking of fat, oil.
Yeah, it's just so lean. Yeah.
That's it, lean. I don't know why I couldn't think of that word. It was a bit dry because you cook it to 160 degrees, and I cooked it in avocado oil. But I wish I did. I didn't brine it or anything like that because I wanted to see just how it was. I think if I were going to do it again, I'd probably try and do some kind of brine. I'd look something up in the hog book and figure out how to do it. I just treated it similar to how I treat whitetail backstrap, which I learned is not the appropriate way to handle hogs.
Yeah, I've experimented, and I think it depends on the pig itself. If it's a sow, if it's a boar, if it's a big old mature boar, you'll do different things than you would with like a younger pig. And that looked like a big pig that you guys took.
Yeah, it was a
It
decent
looked
sized pig.
huge. I've had some pretty good luck with some kind of like medium-sized pigs that, they're pretty tender still. I even did like it was pork shoulder, and I put it on the smoker and you got enough smoke and then wrap it in foil, the Texas crutch. But it was missing the fat, like you were talking, because there's obviously not a lot of fat on it. I threw two, not one, but two sticks of butter in there, and that stuff came out fantastic and makes some tremendous tacos.
Oh, I
But
can
overall,
imagine.
I was extremely pleased. But I would I shoot the biggest boar in a group and then think I'm going to go make a steak out of him? I don't think so, but that's kind of the extreme. I think pretty much everything below that, the biggest, meanest, baddest boar, everything else I think is pretty doable.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think most of
Yeah.
what we'll do with the rest of the pig that we have is slow cooked, braised meals. It seems to be safe. Plus, you get to add the moisture of whatever liquid you're braising it in, and the extra flavors and stuff will help with the taste
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. I'm excited about hog hunting now. We used to, kind of ashamed to say, we used to shoot them and leave them lay because they're such a nuisance. But now it's like, oh, those are damn good, and I want to. And it kind of gives you some options. And if you do get one, every once in a while you do find one that's got a little fat in it, you can kind of mix that into your wild game as well, which is lacking in that fat. But it's not always quite the same as like one of those really fat domestic pigs. So there are options out there. Well, we've covered, kind of most of the process, and then cooking. We talked a little bit about dream hunts. We're at the beginning of application season. Not to completely switch gears on you, but it is all interrelated. And I'm thinking about it. Have you got your tag strategy all lined out for 2024?
Oh man, that is it's a sensitive subject in my household right now. I mentioned this before we were. Uh, it's a sensitive subject because I mentioned this before. I haven't announced it on my podcast yet, and I have to record a solo episode to talk about it. But my wife and I are actually moving,
Yep.
and we're moving out of Texas. It's a big move. My job got sold, and there's some other things going on there. I'm excited about the job stuff. That aside, everything's fine. But we're going to get a little closer to family,
Yeah.
which is nice. We don't really
Yeah.
have family here in Texas. We moved here for my job. Loved it here. I've met some
Yeah.
amazing people here,
Yep.
and I'm planning on coming back. We're keeping an office in Austin, but my job is not going to be here.
Okay.
So I'm going to get to come back, and I've
I
already
see.
talked to Carrie. I'm like, can I come back and hang out with you and record some podcasts and do some muzzleloader hunting with you? And I got his blessing on that, which is great. Thank you, Carrie.
Yeah.
But we're moving, and that has put a wrench in my plans. I finally have enough points to draw an elk tag in Wyoming. And let me tell you how badly I want to apply. As we're recording this, I've got 5 days left to apply, I think. And I don't think I'm going to be able
Yep.
to because I just don't know what my life is going to be like when we're moving. Right now, I have an over-the-counter Arizona archery deer tag. So I'm kind of banking on that. I'm applying for Arizona the way I always apply for Arizona. I'm going to apply for, well, there's some stuff I'm applying for in New Mexico. And I'm going to apply for Texas. But the two hunts that I'm kind of really leaning in on, I'm actually pretty excited to hunt Tennessee public land. So I don't know if I mentioned it in the rant about moving, but we're moving to Tennessee. I'm excited to have to do that because I've hunted Texas public land. There's not much of it. I have to drive very far. It's overcrowded. And I've been lucky to make friends with people that have some property that I can hunt, some private land. And I've also gone out west and had success. So I haven't really been desperate to fill the freezer. Usually I don't have an empty freezer, so it's been nice. So the pressure of hunting in Tennessee and sort of being forced to figure things out, I'm looking forward to. And after hearing Carrie's podcast and talking to him about his Arizona January hunt, I really want to use that over-the-counter tag. So realistically, unless I draw something in Arizona, I'm probably going to do just public land in Tennessee and see if I can't get out to Arizona and use that over-the-counter archery tag.
Yeah. The Arizona hunt is fantastic. And Kerry talked about it, in his podcast. You'd think there's not much out there. There is. It's like a safari. There's quail, There's jackrabbits, there's antelope, there's 2 different kinds of deer. It's beautiful country, and it's generally not just as bad cold as it is the rest of the country that time of year if you go in the winter. But with that tag, you can go January. I think there's a September
And
and
December.
December.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, it's a fantastic opportunity. I've done it a couple times. I took a javelina. I've never taken a deer. Yeah, it took me a couple times to kind of figure out where to go and what to do. I was going solo, kind of like the experiences you've had as well. But it's one of my favorite hunts. It's fantastic.
Yeah, that's my plan. That's kind of what I'm looking at.
Yep. No, that's a good plan, and I completely understand. Especially I've been with the same company for most of my career, but we changed jobs within the company, and so similarly, sometimes you kind of have to play a little safe on your schedule and make sure, because like a Wyoming tag, it's not refundable. You just have to eat it, and those are damn hard to get right now.
Yeah.
It's really unfortunate too, because like when I first started, I drew a general Wyoming tag with 2 points, and can you imagine? And then I went in 2022 on 2 points because I got a tag in the random draw. So I don't know when the next time. I've only got a point. It'll take me another probably 6 years to be able to get back to Wyoming. It's really terrible.
Yeah, I have 5 points this year, and I use GoHunt for my strategy planning. So I use them as my primary resource for figuring out what hunts I can draw and kind of setting my goals for certain things. I have 100% draw odds this year.
Yeah, me too.
And I'm going to end up just buying a point because like you said, it's a non-refundable tag. I am not going to get my tag that I've been waiting 5 years for. And then all of a sudden, because the new leadership and everything at work and I love my company, I love my team. The last thing I want is to get that tag and then find out I have to work and can't use it. So,
that'll make for a grumpy year if you have to do that.
Mm-hmm. My wife would not appreciate me if I was that grumpy, I can tell you.
No. I understand. Yeah, we had big plans for this year. I say we because I've got a hunting partner that I was going with last year as Joel Smith, not any relation, but we're both named Smith. And we're supposed to go to Montana. And 2 weeks out, we got a call. We're going with an outfitter in the Bob Marshall Wilderness for an archery hunt. And 2 weeks out, we got notified. He said, "Oh, well, there's a forest fire, and we've been evacuated from our valley, and all of his stock and everything have been moved, and they can't get into the area." So he's like, "Well, we're not going. We canceled." So it got deferred to this year, and we're not 100% sure if we're going to draw the tags or not. But that's kind of our focus this year, which kind of screwed us both up because, like you, it's a multi-state strategy, and we intended to hunt Montana last year, and he was going to hunt Wyoming this year because he's got enough points. I was going to probably, I don't know, Colorado or Idaho. So you really have to kind of look at all the states and kind of spread your bets, if you will, to be able to make it work.
Yeah.
And it's getting harder.
Yeah, the flexibility, like the nice thing about the multi-state strategy is you almost always have an option, especially if you want to hunt multiple species. The problem is I get a decent amount of time off, but one of the things that I tell people, like my friends, is like, look, if you go out west and you're going to hunt, spend time with your wife. Like, I try and take her on a trip and do something for the same amount of time that I'm going to go out hunting because she likes hunting, but she doesn't necessarily like Western hunting the same way that I do.
It's a little different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I try to treat her and do stuff. So I end up using a good amount of the time, my vacation time, because I'll take her out for a week. I'm planning on hunting for a week. We don't live near my family. So if I want to go see them during the holidays, the time goes very fast. When I can only dedicate my time to one hunt. Like you were talking about, I know, all right, I'm going to hunt mule deer in Montana this year, and then I'm going to do Colorado elk next year. And then maybe the year after that, I'll get lucky and I'll draw Arizona. And I always have that like a year or two ahead. And if one thing gets messed up, it kind of throws everything off. But fortunately, I'm in a position where I have options. So, there's a lot of people, and I just had a podcast on Wednesday with my buddy who just got his first deer ever. And nice. I've been trying to convince him to start applying out west. I'm like, you need to just start now, even if you don't think you're going to go for 3 years. Just start now. This way, by the time comes that you're ready, you've got options and you're not going to be scrambling to figure out what it is.
Yep. No, that's wise words. Wise words, multiple categories there. It sounds like good marital advice. You're well on your way to having a happy marriage, it sounds like. And I can tell you this year we'll be married 30 years. And I can tell you what you just said is spot on, is you better take time with your spouse and have some balance, right? Between your time, for us, we have my time, her time, and our time. And there needs to be that togetherness, right?
Absolutely.
So it has to be. And, you have that balance, and a good spouse will appreciate, this is something that is so important to you. And then if, they truly love you, they're going to want you to go. But just like you said, your wife wanted you to stay out on the Arizona trip. So that's impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a lucky man.
Yeah, I think we all count ourselves lucky if we found somebody that will put up with us, and go along this journey of life with us. So, Well, Andrew, I've kept you for a better part of an hour. I really appreciate your time. I also kind of look to you from a podcast perspective because you're ahead of me. You're nearly at a year. I've got about a month under my belt. And you helped me too with, some pointers on using some of the technology to do these remote podcasts. I really appreciate that. And thank you. And I just hope that, you continue on this journey. I think you're talented from a perspective, especially your video editing. It's just really nice. I got some things to learn. I may have to call you and ask you how you're doing some of the editing and the lighting and things like that. And I wish you well on your journey and your relocation as well. And I hope you draw the tags you want that are coming up. And I hope that you don't accidentally draw one for your wife when you're not ready for it. I thought that was pretty funny.
Oh yeah, you heard that part, huh?
I did. That was pretty good.
She laughs about it now. She was not laughing.
That's good.
She was not laughing when I originally told her about that, though. For those who don't know, I secretly have been applying and building points for my wife. And when this is a tip, I guess, if you have multiple credit cards, if you're going to do this, use a different card for you and your wife. Because when I drew, so Arizona in particular, when you draw, for those who haven't drawn Arizona, the credit card gets hit before Arizona tells you what you drew. So I saw the charge on my credit card. And at first I was like, oh my God, I drew an elk tag. And then immediately I was like, crap, what if my wife drew an elk tag? And the panic set because, and I mentioned this talking to Carrie, I don't know if it was on my podcast or one of his, but I pretty much I don't hold anything back from my wife. I didn't tell her about the points because my hope was one day she'll want to go out west. And when that moment comes, congratulations, you can get any hunt you want kind of thing. Yeah. But I felt really guilty because I was like, oh no, this could be her. And that would be really stressful for her. So I need to just tell her just in case. And I told her, and she took it better than I thought she was going to, but she definitely caught her off guard. That was a fun story. But I appreciate all the kind words you said too. I still feel like I don't really know what I'm doing at all. And I get in those moments where I just get fixated on certain things and I'm obsessed about quality of things. And I'm a very process-oriented guy, so I try to outline everything and figure it out. I spend too much time on it, probably. But I appreciate everything that you said, and I'm looking forward to continuing. This is a long journey for me. It's a journey of passion. That's not like I don't make any money off of this. I've spent too much money on this, and I'm going to spend
It's a money-losing proposition, I'm afraid.
But it's fun. I like I've being able to connect to people like you. I've already, in just 9-10 months of doing this, I've made such great connections and talking to people. I've learned more about hunting and myself. And even if nothing comes of it, but helping a few people here and there, and then being able to connect with other people that shared the same passion and ethics as I do, I plan on doing it for as long as I can. And
that's great.
Yeah, that's the goal.
So where can folks find you? On the interwebs and everywhere else.
Yeah, so the EndurHunt Podcast, it's EndurHunt. You can find that on basically any podcast platform. I do video podcasts, so you'll find those on Spotify or YouTube. I got both of those. It's EndurHunt on everything. And then on Instagram is the best social media platform to connect with me with. I have a TikTok. I post on there, but I don't actually pay much attention to it. To be honest, I really don't like social media that much. I'm not one of those people that loves it. I love making the content, but I do not love posting and maintaining a presence on social media. But
Yeah.
I do love interacting with people. So I'd be happy to take anyone's questions, send me a message, a direct message, comment on one of my posts. I love to interact with people and answer questions. So Instagram, the EndurHunt Instagram is the best way to get in touch with me if you want to talk. And then we're on all the major podcasting platforms.
Sounds good. Well, Andrew, thank you again so much, and looking forward to learning more from you. And I'll be tuning into your podcast as well. So good luck on your journey.
Thanks, Chris. I'll be listening to yours, and I hope to have you on my podcast, and we can talk all about cooking for first generation hunters. I'd love to set that up.
That'd be a blast. I'm looking forward to it. Well, thank you, everybody. That concludes our episode. We'll just good luck and good night to everybody.
I want you to know it's over.
Well, bye.